Stanford University.
Okay, well, welcome to lecture 14 of CS193P, and today is mostly a demo day. I'm going to spend almost the entire time doing a demo, but I do have a little bit to say at the beginning, 4 or 5 slides, so let's jump into that. First, I'm going to have one slide where we're going to talk a little bit about Core Data's thread safety, because you have a multi-threaded app in here in Assignment 5, and you're going to be going and doing some stuff in Assignment 6, and you want to make sure you understand what you can do in another thread and not. Then we're going to talk about core data and table views. Table views are one of the most common ways to look at data that's stored in a core data database, and so there's some magic in iOS to make that just happen automatically. And then the big old demo. All right, so core data thread safety. Okay, here's the deal on core data. NS managed object, which you'll remember, is your portal. You need that thing to get at all your core data in your database. Okay, that's the fulcrum upon which everything in core data turns, is not thread safe. So you can only access an NS managed object context in the thread that created it. Okay, so understand that. Now, you obviously can have a single database that has multiple UI managed documents with multiple contexts. They could be created in different threads. That's all fine, except for the fact that you have to manage the interaction of them, and that's beyond the scope of this class. So for this class, NS managed object context, only access it in the thread you created. You will not need more than one for your homework. Question?
When you say it's thread safe, does that just mean that it's atomic and it locks, or is there a difference?
So the question is, what do I mean by thread safe? What I mean by thread safe is your program will probably crash if you access the same managed object context instance in multiple threads. Or even if you access that instance in a different thread than it was created. Your app is going to be the data will be wonky and it will crash. Okay? Because it's not designed to work that way. Okay? Now, what can we do about that though? And especially in iOS 5, there's kind of a nice way to deal with that. There is a method on managed object context called perform block. There's also one called perform block and wait. And you just give it a block, and it will ensure that everything inside that block gets executed on the right thread for that context. Okay? Now, this doesn't necessarily mean, oh, I just got multi-threadedness. Okay, probably not. In fact, if you create the context in your main thread, this block is just going to be posted back to the queue for the main thread. Okay, so it's not like you're running it in a different thread. All this perform block does is make sure that the thing inside the block gets run on the right thread. Okay, but it's a good way, and I'll do it in the demo today, just to be safe and make sure, okay, I'm touching my context. I'm going to ask my context to perform that in a block that's going to be run on the right thread. Now, you're not going to have to do this for your homework, but I want to say this so that you know about this, because when you build a really big app, a sophisticated app, you might want to really have multiple threaded action going on. And there is a cool way to do simple multi-threaded core data access in a context, which is that a lot of managed object contexts, including all core data ones that use SQL backing stores, have what's called a parent context. That's like another managed object context that your managed object context writes into before it writes onto the database. So it's kind of a two-level thing. And it is actually possible for you to get that parent context. You just call the parent context property and start doing things in it and using perform block on it. And it will always run in a different thread. Okay, so the parent context does not run in the same thread that you created the managed object context. It might run in some other thread. In fact, it will run in some other thread, and you can get stuff to go happen in that thread and access the parent context by doing perform block on the parent context. Now, that sounds great, except for you got to remember that if you change the parent context, you have to save your changes and then refetch to the child context, to the context that you started with. Okay? You got to refetch. It's not going to automatically propagate all the changes up and down, okay, up to the database and back down to the child context. You have to save and refetch. Now again, you don't have to do any of this for your homework. I just want you to know that this parent context thing exists and that it is a pretty cool way if you wanted to like load you did a Flickr fetch and you want to load it all up in some other thread, not the main thread, put it all in the database, and then just have the main thread fetch it all really fast. Okay, that's a good way to do that. All right, don't have to do that for this assignment whatsoever. The question is, what determines the child-parent relationship? When you create a UI managed object document, for example, and you get its managed object context, these are quite a mouthful, all these words, it gets created with a parent context automatically. So it always has a parent context, so you can always ask it what is parent. So it's created for you, is the bottom line when you create it. There are other ways to create a managed object context so that it won't have a parent context, in which case parent context would be nil, but when you use UI managed document, you get it for free all the time. Okay, now on to another topic here, which is core data and table view. There is a very important class in iOS called NSFetched Results Controller. Okay, it is not a view controller. It is a controller that controls fetched results and how they get communicated to a table view. So it's an NS object, this NSFetched Results Controller. That confuses people sometimes. But all NSFetched Results Controller does is it hooks up an NSFetch request, hopefully you remember that from Tuesday's lecture, to a UI table view controller. Okay? And it hooks it up in a really powerful way. And then the first thing that it does is it can answer all the questions in the UI table view data source protocol, like how many sections are there? How many rows in section? Okay? The only question it can't do is self or row at index path, right? Where it has to give a table, you have to give it a table, so you have to do that yourself. But even that it'll help you with. So here's an example of what fetch results controller looks like. So if I had a table view and it had a property on it, which was an NS fetch results controller, see, self.fetch results controller, let's say I had such a table view, then once I hook it up to the fetch request, which I'll show you how to do, I can say things like self.fetch results controller sections count, and now I got the number of sections. Or self.fetch results controller sections object at index section, which gives me this section object, number of objects, and it'll tell me how many rows are in that table. Okay? So the bottom line is it does all the work for you except for self or row and index path. And even self or row and index path is easy to implement because of this method in fetch results controller called object at index path. So object at index path, you give it an index path in the table, and it will return to you the NS managed object that's being displayed at that row in the table. Okay? Exactly what you want, basically. So if you have to implement self or row and index path, you're just going to, one of the first lines in there after you create your cell, it's going to be managed object equals self.fetch results controller object index path. The index path you got as an argument. Now you've got the managed object. You can do value for key on it, or if you've got a subclass of it, you can use dot notation to get the properties of that object. Because remember that in a core data driven table view, every row is represented by an object in the database. Okay? One-to-one relationship between a row and an object in the database. Now, how, and remember, this is all, what objects are in each row are controlled by a fetch request. Okay? So how do we create the fetched results controller? This is how you allocate an init1 right here. The arguments that you have to provide are the fetch request that you want to hook up to this table view, the managed object context, all this fetching is going to go on in, a section name key path and a cache name, which I'll talk about in a minute. So here's, for example, how you might use it. I'm going to make a request here, a fetch request. This is going to be a table that is going to have photos in it. Okay, so I've presumably got some photo entity in my database. So the request is a request with entity name photo. It's going to be sorted by the titles of those photos. So title has to be an attribute on photo in my database. And then I've got a predicate here, which is whotook.name equals some string. That means I'm only going to show photos where the photographer's name is that. So if I create this fetch request and then create the fetch results controller using that fetch request and argument, now I'll have a table where every row is a photo whose photographer's name matches the string photog name. Does everyone understand what's going on here? So it's super simple. Don't overthink it. That's all it does. Now, these two extra arguments here, we'll talk about the last one first, cache name. So cache name just specifies a string for a name of a cache where it will cache the results so that it's super fast, even between launches of your app. Okay? But this, you got to be a little careful. If you change the parameters of the fetch request, like you change the predicate or you change the sort descriptor so that it sorts differently, then the cache will get all messed up. Okay? So if you do change the fetch request that's associated with this table through the fetch results controller, you either have to delete the cache, and there's a method to do that, I think it's a factory method in NS managed object. It might be an NS fetch results controller. You can delete the cache, or you can just specify null here and not cache the results. So for a small database, you can just specify null. You don't need to cache the results. For a very, very large one, if you're going to be changing your request, you got to delete your cache. The second thing is the argument key that says which section each managed object is in. Okay, that's just an attribute on the objects, photos, in this case, have to be an attribute of the photos. And that attribute, if I ask it about a photo, it's going to tell me the section title. You know how tables can be organized into sections, right? Remember, we talked about that? So this is going to be the title of the section. Well, the key here is that however you sort the table has to line up with those sections. So, the first 7 objects all have to respond for this key with the same word, right? And then the next 7 have to respond with the next section title. You see what I'm saying? The sort, you can't just have this thing sorted and then random section names all around. It's got to group them, and you have to make sure that works. Another way to think about this is the section, whatever this key that's going to say what the section titles are, has to sort in exactly the same order as the rows. Okay? So I see a lot of people going, I don't quite understand that. Not important for your homework, so you can think about it later, I guess. Okay, so fetch results controller not only loads up the table based on your fetch request, right? It does that fetch, loads it up. If anything changes in the context, it'll automatically update the table. Okay? So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to refetch ever. You just hook it up and it'll just always work. As long as the changes to the database are all happening through the context that the fetch results controller was created with, it'll automatically update it. Now, it does this because the fetch results controller itself has a delegate, which you usually hook up to be your table view controller, and it sends it all kinds of messages like, oh, this object just got added, oh, this attribute changed in this object, blah, 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 and makes the table view go change everything. And there's actually some code you would have to put in your table view to do that, and you can find that code in the documentation for NS Fetch Results Controller. Okay, if you go to the documentation for NS Fetch Results Controller, those of you who have your computers open, you can just go look at it right now. You'll see at the beginning there's a whole bunch of code there that you're supposed to basically copy and paste into your table view. Okay, but that's kind of a pain, so we did it for you. Okay, so we're going to give you a class called Core Data Table View Controller. It's posted on the web. Actually, I don't know. I don't think I posted this stuff today, did I? Bad me. I'll do it right after class. And Core Data Table View Controller, you'll see it in the demo. All it does is basically copy and paste that code into a subclass of UI Table View. So if you make a subclass of Core Data Table View Controller, you'll have this property, Fetched Results Controller. And if you set that property to be a Fetched Results Controller, it'll just automatically work. It'll automatically do that fetch and keep it up to date. Okay? So super simple to hook up a core data database to a table. And you'll see it in the demo today. We're going to do it in the demo. Yeah, so how does it work? It copies and pastes the code, basically. You just subclass it. The one thing you do have to do when you subclass core data table view controller, of course, is you have to implement self or row and index path. And also, if you want to segue or did select row and index path, you'll have to do those as well. But you don't have to do any of the other num rows, in section, none of that. You don't have to do any of that. Okay? You'll see it in the demo. Hopefully it'll make a lot more sense. So let's talk about the demo and what I'm going to do. It's basically a simple demo. It's a fresh app, and it's going to go do that recent georeference photos request that I've done in the past to just get a few hundred of the latest photos posted on Flickr. But it's not going to show the photos in the table. It's going to show the photographers who took those photos. Okay? And then if you click on a photographer, then it'll show you a list of photos taken by that photographer. Okay? And then if you click on a photo, it'll show you the image of it. Make sense? Super simple app. And the way we're going to implement this, though, is we're going to do that fetch from Flickr, and we're going to put all the data in a core data database. And then we're just going to use a core data table view to make the right fetch request and link them up and watch it just work. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. Yeah, things to watch for. We are going to use a UI managed document, so you'll see how to do open and save and create one of those. You can see how we create a schema, which I talked about on Tuesdays, using this graphical tool. We're going to make categories of these NS managed object subclasses, and in the category, we'll add a factory method to create a photo, basically, and also want to create a photographer. And then we'll use Core Data Table View. So you're going to see it all today. That's why this is such a long demo. All right, so next code. So I'm going to create a new project. Now, I'm going to do the storyboard part first, so partially so you can just see, again, what I'm talking about with this app, but also because you should be really familiar now with how to do storyboards and set up segues and all that stuff. So I'm going to kind of go through that pretty quick. All right, hopefully you'll be completely, everything I'm doing, you'll hopefully be like, oh yeah, I know what that is. All right, so let's start single view application. I'm going to call this thing Photomania. All right, no class prefix. We'll make this an iPhone only app for this demo. Put it in home directory developer as usual. All right, here it is. Here's the storyboard for it. It has this view controller thing, but I'm going to do a completely my own storyboard. So let's make some space here. I'm going to go and drag out a couple of table view controllers. All right, so there's 1 and 2. And let's arrange this. Okay, so we can see. I'm going to put them inside of a navigation controller. Okay, so this is basically our entire UI right here. Make sure that we start at the navigation controller. Now, I have these 3 different view controllers here. I need to set their classes to something, as you well know. They have to be some sort of custom class for them to do anything. So let's do that. And actually, before we do that, I'm going to do one other thing, which is I'm going to import this code. This is the same code, the Flickr fetcher and the Core Data Table View that you're going to have given to you at for your homework. And I've also created this little image view controller so we don't have to kind of waste time doing that. So let me move things around so that I can drag this in. So we'll just drag that code in there. We'll copy the code. And I'll be showing you the contents of these files when we get to that part of it. Okay, so that now that we have this code in, actually we have this image view controller right here, which is just a simple image view controller I wrote. It doesn't have any scrolling or anything like that. You all did that for your assignment 5. So let's go ahead and hook that one up real quick. We'll just change its class to be image view controller. And it needs to have a image view. So let's drag that out. Here it is. Put that in here. Until it fits. I have hopefully an outlet here, which is image view, which I do. Okay, so that's that one. That's easy. The other 2, we're going to create custom subclasses of UI view controller. So let's do that. File, new file. You all know how to do that. It's going to be a UI view controller. I'm going to call the first one photographer table view controller. Okay, you guys can all have a pool out there how many times I misspell the word photographers and how many times I missay it. It's going to be a core data table view controller, but I'm going to start out with it just being UI table view controller, and then I'll show you how we change its superclass to that. So here it is, photographer's table view controller. I'm going to delete everything in here except I'm going to leave, see, I don't need any of this because I'm going to use the fetch results controller, but I do need self row and index path, so I'm going to leave that. And I'm not going to use any of this, and I'm not going to do did select row because I'm going to segue. So there's that. While we're here, let's go ahead and change the cell identifier here to be photographer cell or something like that. Then we'll even, oops, copy. Go back to our storyboard. Let's go ahead and set this thing's class. Right here, we'll set it to be photographer table view controller. Let's edit its prototype cell. We'll set that reuse identifier, subtitle. I'm going to do subtitle because I'm going to show you the name of the photographer as the title, and then the subtitle is going to be how many photos that photographer has taken. Okay, because once I have a core data database with all that data in there, I can get information like that really in one line of code. Okay, so you'll be able to see how that works. And while we're here, let's go ahead and do the segue. So I'm going to segue from this cell over to here. It'll be push. We'll call this segue something like show photos, whoops, for photographer. Okay, So that's that one. That's good. Now let's do the second one. It needs a custom class as well. So I'm going to say new file, another view controller. We'll call this one photos by photographer table view controller. Is that long enough? I think so. There's that. We'll create that. Same thing here. I don't need anything except for the self or row and index path because this is going to be a fetch results controller driven table. I'm also only going to segue, so I don't need any of this. If I was an iPad, I might need this did select row and index path, but I could always put it back. Same thing here. We'll call this a photo cell. Copy that. Let's go back to our storyboard. Let's select this thing. Let's change its class to photos by photographer. Let's go here to the table view cell. Set its reuse identifier. We'll make this one subtitle also. We'll actually have the title of the photo and then the subtitle of the photo. Then let's do the segue here, like this, push. We'll call this segue show photo. Okay? All right. So sometimes doing the storyboard first like this is a good way to kind of just picture what's going on in your app. And hopefully this is helping you picture that we've got these photographers. We click on a photographer, we got the photos by that photographer. We click on the photos, we get the image. Everyone got that? Okay, hopefully I didn't forget anything there. Okay, so how are we going to do this? We are going to have a document for the photographer's table view controller. All right, so I'm going to add a public API to this thing. And I'm going to just have a non-atomic, strong UI managed document. And I'll call this photo database. Okay, so this is going to be a managed document whose contents is going to be the core data database with all the photos and photographers in there. Okay, and that's typical. You create a managed document, that's kind of your database at the top level. So we need to synthesize that, obviously. Okay, now, how am I going to load this database up? Well, you know, there's a lot of ways to go about this. I'm just going to do something for the purpose of the demo where if view will appear happens, okay, if we get into view will appear and the photo database is still nil, then I'm going to create it and load it up. Okay, I'm just going to create a default document. But you know, I made that photo database public, so someone could be setting the database that they want to see the photographers for. But here I'm just going to, for the purpose of the demo, have a little default. So I'm just going to say if my photo database is nil, then we're going to create it. Now, what do you need to create a managed document? You need the URL, right? Its constructor, its designated initializer is init with file URL. So let's go and do that. I'm going to get that by, we'll make some more space so you can see more code here. So I'm going to get this URL. I'm going to start off by getting the documents directory. So hopefully you realized how to do this in the last homework assignment, but I'm just going to go to File Manager, the default manager, and I'm going to ask it URLs for directory, and the search directory I want is NS document directory, and I want user domain mask. Okay? And then I'm just going to grab the last object out of there to get the URL. So now I've got the documents directory, but I need to append onto it whatever name I want this thing to have. So I'm going to say URL by appending path component. Let's call this default photo database. Okay, so that's the name of my default document. Remember, I'm only got here because I got to view will appear. I'm just about to appear, and nobody set my database, so I'm just making a default one. Okay? So then I can just say self.photodatabase equals UI managed document, alloc, init with file URL, the URL. Okay? So that's pretty straightforward start. Hopefully everybody understands where we're going here. Now, what about using this document? So in this case, or if someone sets this document externally, I need to start using it, right? I need to set my fetch results controller basically to use its context. But how are we going to do that? And I decided the way I'm going to do that is in the setter for set photo database, anytime someone sets this, as long as it's changed, so if it's a new database, And someone asked me once, do I really need to do that? If not, do you think? No, you really don't. The chances that someone's going to call your setter twice with the same thing is basically nil. No pun intended. Not likely to happen. But it's kind of good coding practice to do that. You might make an argument that you don't want to do this, and that if someone sets the database twice, you wanted to reload it or something like that. I can see those arguments as well. We're going to do it this way. So we have this photo database. Now that it's set, I'm going to say use document. I'm going to have a method. I just want to put this in its own method here called use document. So I'm going to have a method use document. And this is going to be the thing that starts using the document. Okay? Now, what does it mean to use the document? Well, it means that if it's not created yet, we're going to create it, and we're going to actually load it up with Flickr data too. Okay? Which you could argue whether that's a good strategy, but because someone might be sending this to an empty document because they want it to be empty, and then they're going to add stuff later. So, but for the demo, we'll go ahead and do that. Or it might be already there on disk but not open, so we got to open it. Or someone might have handed us this document already open. They opened it. Okay? So we got to handle all three of those cases. So let's start with the case where it's not on disk. So I'm going to say if ns file manager, default manager, file exists at path, self.photodatabase .file URL, and we need to make sure I get this right too. We need to get the URL as a path, so I'm going to say path. All right, did I get all my square brackets right there? Okay, so here I'm just checking to see, does this photo database exist on disk? Okay, and if it does not, this is not, then I need to create it. And hopefully you remember from last lecture, the way we create it is very easy. We're just going to say photo database, save to URL. Okay, the photo database's URL. Save operation is UI document save operation for creating. Okay, we got creating or overriding. In this case, it doesn't exist, so we're creating it. And then we got this completion handler, which takes a bool as an argument. So we got to say bool success. Okay, so that's creating it. So we only do that if the document doesn't exist. All right. Now, what if the document exists? So this is the else case. But let's say the document is closed. So we look at its document state, and it says UI document state closed. Okay. Then we need to open the file. Okay. So we're going to say self.photodatabase open with completion handler. Again, we got this bool. Oops, bool. I have a problem with bool, don't I? Success. All right. And it opened it. Now, notice I'm not doing anything in the completion handlers yet. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's say that it's already open. Then the document state would be UI document state normal. Okay. Then we need to do something. Okay. So we really need to do the same thing in all three of these cases, whether we're creating it, or whether we're opening it, or whether it's already open, which is we need to set up our fetched results controller to use the managed object context in the document. Everyone understand that? It's a really important thing to understand. This is where we get our hook to the Core Data database. So I'm going to have a method here called setup fetched results controller. How about that? And I'm going to call it from all three of these things. Okay, and then I'm going to implement it here. Void fetch result controller. All right, and this is basically going to do something like self.fetched results controller equals something using our self.photodatabase managed object context. Now, this, though, is only going to work if we're a subclass of Core Data Table View Controller, right? Because that's the thing that adds that property. So I'm going to go back to my header file here, and I'm going to, and you're going to need to do this in your homework, I'm going to import Core Data Table View Controller, and I'm going to make us inherit from that, and which is okay because Core Data Table View Controller, you'll see here, inherits from UI Table View Controller, and it also serves as the fetch results controller's delegate. That's basically how it works. And there's a lot of comments in here in the header file, but the main thing is there's this fetch results controller property, which you got to set. Okay, you don't ever have to call perform fetch. That happens automatically, and don't worry about the stuff at the bottom there. So what does Core Data Table View Controller look like on the inside? It just has this perform fetch here is mostly just NS logs to tell you what's going on. If you turn debugging on, if you turn the debug property on in Core Data Table View, it'll log everything that it's doing when it fetches. Then it has the set of fetch results controller which mostly logs a lot and also calls perform fetch for you. Okay, and then here's all the code that was copy and pasted. I told you we'd copy and paste code for you. Here it is. This is all copied and pasted out of NS Fetch Results Controller's documentation. Okay, it's all really simple stuff, one-liners. Okay, this is all what Fetch Results Controller is made to do, is to implement all these methods for you. Okay, so that's all that's in Core Data Table View. All right, so we're going to come back to this later because I want to show you how we load up the Core Data, how we create and load up the Core Data database. Because obviously we can't do any fetches in here until we have some entities and some attributes on there. So how are we going to do that? Well, first of all, when do we want to do that? And the when is when we create this thing. Okay, so when we create the document, okay, this is the creation right here, I'm going to load it up. Now this might surprise you. I'm going to say fetch Flickr data into document, let's say, self.photo database. So this is going to be the method that does that fetching. Let's put this here. Okay, now what might surprise you is that I still call setup fetch results controller here, even though I'm going to call setup Flickr data into document. Okay, fetch Flickr data into document. You might think, well, I have to wait until I fetch that data, but no. Okay, because I'm going to set up the fetched results controller to look in the database. Then I'm going to go populate the database, and it's going to automatically see that happening and automatically update my table. Okay, so I don't have to wait. I can do it all anytime I want. So all I have to do in this fetch Flickr data in document, and in fact I'm even going to do this in a thread here because I don't want to block my main thread, so I'm just going to do the normal thing that you're used to. We'll call this fetch queue. We'll create a queue. We'll call this Flickr fetcher. It'll be a serial queue. And we're just going to dispatch async onto the fetch queue. And what we will do is well, of course, we'll do our Flickr fetch. So let's go up here and import. Oops, import Flickr fetcher. Same. But actually, I said same. It's really not the same Flickr fetcher. I put some more stuff in there for you. So make sure you grab a new Flickr fetcher from the web too. But I'm just doing NS array photos equals Flickr fetcher. I think it was called recent georeference photos. Yep. Okay, so boom, I just got a whole bunch of Flickr photos. Awesome. Now I'm going to put them in the database, and I would probably just do something like this. Let's call this Flickr info in photos. And then in here, I would want to, start creating objects in documents context. Okay, but there's a problem with this. Okay, I can't really do this right in here. And that's because I am not in the right thread. Okay, I'm in this Flickr fetching thread, and I cannot start touching that managed object context for this document in that thread because it wasn't created in that thread. Okay, so what I need to do here is document.managedObjectContext perform block, and do this inside there. Okay, let's also make sure we dispatch release our Flickr fetcher fetch queue. Get rid of this junk. Okay, so does everyone understand why I'm doing this block thing right here? Because I'm in the Flickr fetcher thread here, and I cannot be accessing the context in here. Question?
Why can't you see it, or you don't want to mess it?
It's not thread safe. Okay, the context is not thread safe. The question is, why can't I touch the context here? And the answer is because it's not thread safe. it can only be touched in the thread it was created in. So that's what perform block is going to do. It's going to make sure this block runs on that thread, whatever that thread is. In our case, it's the main thread, because we created this UI managed document right here on the main thread. Okay? Question?
Would you have called dispatch async?
That's a great question. So the question is, could I have called dispatch async right here? Absolutely, I could have. I could have said dispatch async, get main queue, do it. I would have had to know that this managed object context was created on the main queue. But if I did know that, and it might not necessarily happen that that was true. We know that's true usually because we create this database ourselves, but someone else might have created this thing and handed it to us from some other queue. So probably not, because we tried to do all the UI stuff in the main queue. But that's a good question. We could.
Which thread
The question is there any way to know which thread this context created? And I don't think so. I don't think there's any public API that says, tell me the thread, the queue, really, that this was created on. I don't think so. All right. So we can start creating documents here, but now's a good time for us to go and create our data model. Actually, the photos, the entities, and all that stuff you saw with the graphical. Let's go do that, and then we'll come back here and start creating some objects. All right. So to create our data model, just like we create anything, we're always going to do file new. Okay, new file. Okay. This time we're going to go down to where it says core data. You see core data here, number 4, and we're going to click on data model. Okay, don't accidentally click on mapping model or NF managed object subclass. We want data model. So we're going to click that, and we can call it anything we want, but I'm going to call it Photomania because it's the only model and it's for the whole application. You can have multiple models. We're not going to talk about that in this class and how you manage those, but it's possible. And you really can call this anything you want. If you only have one, it'll find the one. So here it is. You probably recognize this from the last lecture. And here's entities, and here's our attributes, and we don't have any yet. So let's just put these babies in here. So there's photo and photographer. All right. Photographer only is going to have one attribute, which is name. Okay, it's a string. Photo has a few attributes. It has a title. It has a subtitle. We need a unique string for the photo, because one thing I want to be able to do is fetch photos from Flickr and then have a refresh button that fetches more photos. And when it fetches more, if I get the same one that I already got, I don't want to create two things in the database. I want it to be unique. So I'm going to show you how we can do that uniquing. Then let's say the URL for the image, which we'll have to store as a string. All these will have to be, whoops, not a Boolean. All these will have to be strings. Okay. String. I remember, I think that's all I need. Now, these are all the attributes that these two entities have. Very easy to add. By the way, we could also inspect these things over here. Right? If we click on them, we can see there. But remember, I also told you that there's this graphical view. And when you go to the graphical view, you can see that there's kind of a graphical view of it. And this is really nice when it comes time to create relationships between the objects. So I'm going to do that. So here we go. Control key. Don't say I've never done that before. Control key, drag, and now it creates a relationship between those two. Okay, here it's called new relationship on this side, and it's called new relationship on that side too. Obviously, that's not very good names. Let's do the photo side, and we'll call this one on the photo side. And actually, I can double click right in here. Okay, I'm going to call it who took, just like I did in the slides on Tuesday, because the photographer is who took the photo. And then on the photographer side, I'm going to call it photos, because this is all the photos that this photographer has taken. But the photos can be multiple. A given photographer could take 10 or 20 or 100 photos. So I need to mark this attribute as too many. And if you notice there, when I did that, this became a double arrow. You see, single arrow, double arrow. Okay? So that's all that's required to set up a relationship between these objects. Now, one thing that's very important to understand is that database integrity is maintained by core data. So if I set who took in a photo, it will update photos. Okay, that set will get updated. And vice versa. If I go over and add a photo to the list of photos for a photographer, it'll set the who took of that photo. Does that make sense? So you never have to worry about making sure things don't match up. Okay? If you have a relationship, an inverse relationship like this, it's automatic. Core Data will automatically manage either side. So you can set whichever side is more convenient for you, and it'll set the other side. Okay? So that's it. That's pretty much our entire data model. Okay? Nothing, we don't need to do anything more than that. If we go back here now, we want to start creating objects. How would we do that? Well, one way we might do is we just might start typing like this: managed object photo equals, and you'll remember from Tuesday that NSEntity description has a factory method called insert new object for entity for name, and here we would specify the name of the entity, which is photo, and here we have to give the context, which would be document.managedObjectContext. Now notice that I passed the document along as an argument to fetch Flickr data, and that's the reason I did that is because someone might come along and set this while we're doing this. Okay, this runs in a thread. It could take 10 or 20 seconds. And somebody might come along and change the database. And so that's why I decided to, when I fetch Flickr data into a document, to kind of do that off on the side. Now, if when I'm done, the document that we're displaying in our table is still the photo one that we started with, it'll be updating because the fetch results controller will be noticing and updating it. But if it's different, no changes will be happening in our table. Okay? That's the power of having this fetch results controller, just always watching what's going on and doing the right thing. So that's one way to create a photo. You know, it's not great looking code, and we could say, you know, set value. And this would be the Flickr info object for key, Flickr photo title for key. And we'd have to here type title, which is got to be the name of an attribute in our database. So we could load up our photo with all this set value for key, but obviously it's messy. Okay, it's kind of hard to read. You know, you have all these literal strings, like I mentioned on Tuesday. That's no good. So it's kind of a mess. So really, we want to use these custom subclasses of NSManageObject. We want to create a new class called photo. It'll be a subclass of NSManageObject, and then we can use dot notation to access all the attributes. All right, so let's just go do that. Very easy to do. And go back to our data model. Here it is. I'm just going to select both of my entities. I'm going to do this thing where I generate them both at the same time so you can see the problem that I talked about on Tuesday. So we just go up here to editor, okay, and we say create manage object subclass. It's going to ask where do you want them. We'll just put them where all the rest of our code is. Here it made them. We can see which one won the race to get made first. It looks to me like photo got made first because who took is not a photographer star, but in photographer, add photos object is a photo. All right, so photographer looks fine, but photo unfortunately had to go first. So how do we fix this? Again, we just go back to our model and just generate them again. Because now since they've both been generated once, they each know about each other, and we can just do this again. So let's do that. It's going to ask if we want to replace it, which we do. Okay, now they're fixed. You only have to do this the very, very, very first time that you create these. After this, everything's set up in the database. It's all good. So now you can see that who took is a photographer. Okay, all the other attributes are strings. These are just normal properties. And then photographer got its name, and it's got this NS set, which is the relationship to the photos. Question?
Do you only do that just to show us like if there are more attributes, or would it be like, equally fine to just change the NSManageObject where to...
So the question is, could I have just gone in here and typed photographer right there? Absolutely, I could have. No doubt about it. I tend to, just as a matter of style, never do that. I always make it so my generated code is generated because I don't want to change it in some way and then, oh, I generated it again later and, oh, I lost that. And you know what I'm saying? But yeah, obviously, if you change it here, it's fine. This code was generated for you. It's your code. You can do whatever you want with it. But be careful because you're going to change your schema and generate it again.
Also, should we change the retains to strong, or should we be like worried about
Yeah, so the question is here, should we be changing these retains to strongs? And don't worry about it. Don't touch these classes. Okay, these things that are generated, just leave them generated. Don't worry about the fact that this says retain. Okay, it's unfortunate that it does. Should say strong, but it is what it is. Okay, so now that we have that, we have this photo class. We can go up here and import this photo class. Okay, we could also import photographer here while we're at it. Oh, there's the misspell. Okay. And then instead of saying NS managed object photo here, we can say photo equals insert new object. And then saying all this set value business, we can just say photo.title equals this thing. Okay? So we don't even need this, right? So this is definitely a little easier to understand what's going on. Now, we got some other attributes we got to set of photo, subtitle, who took, we got to set, image URL, things like that. But this is part of the object-oriented, learning to be a good object-oriented programmer. This is not the place to be setting those attributes. Okay? Where are we right now in this code? We're in photographer table view controller. Well, why would you ever have code that's creating and setting up the attributes of a photo in photographer table view controller? You just would never do that. That would be very poor object-oriented encapsulation. You want the code that sets up and creates a photo in the photo class. Okay? That's where it should be. You should have a factory on it. Say, give me a photo with this Flickr data, for example. Okay, that's what you want. So we want to put it in there, but again, we don't want to touch that generated code, and that's where categories come in. All right, so let's add a category for photo so that we can have basically a factory method, a class method, that's going to create this, put all this code into that, and then we can just call one line here in our photographer table view controller to create one. So how do we create a category? I didn't really show this. I actually updated the slides from last lecture to throw a couple of screenshots into how to do this. But as you might imagine, it's new file. Okay, that's how we create any new files. We go to new file. And if you go up to the top, Cocoa Touch right here, you'll see Objective-C category, same place as Objective-C class and UI view controller. So if you do that, it's going to ask you, what do you want to call the category? So I'm going to do a category on photo here that takes a Flickr thing and turns it into a photo. So I'm going to call the category Flickr. And it's a category on the photo class. All right, so this means I'm going to create a category, which is going to add methods to this class, photo, and I'm going to call that category Flickr. And this is what it's going to generate for me. All right, so here's my photo Flickr. Notice that it called the class, or not the class, it called the category files photo plus Flickr.h&m. That is the naming convention we use for categories, okay? Class name plus, and then the name of the category. And then here's the header file. It just has interface, and here's the implementation file. Okay, so no, currently this category is not adding any methods to the photo class. But we're going to change that. Let's call it, how about photo with Flickr info, and then we'll give it a Flickr dictionary. And we also need to pass one other thing if we're going to create a photo here. Can anyone think of what that would be? We're doing something in a database. What do we need? Managed object context. So I'm going to say in manage object context and pass one of those along. Okay, I can't really do anything in the database without a managed object context. So photo can't even create itself in the database unless it's got a managed object context to work with. All right, so let's go look at the implementation of this guy. Now I'm going to start the implementation of this actually by getting that yucky code over here out of there. So let's take that out of there and put it in here. Okay, I'm going to clean it up a little bit. Because I know I'm going to be doing something here, so let's do that. Photo equals that. Photo title equals that. We still need to create more things there. The context is the argument that was passed in instead of the document, so that's context. All right, so that's pretty good. Also, we need this symbol, so let's import Flickr. All right, so we're good. So this is a good start, but there's something else to think about here. Okay, we could just add the rest of the things and we'd be fine. But then every time we called this method, it would create a new Flickr photo, a new photo in the database rather, for a given Flickr photo, even if that Flickr photo was already in the database. Okay, so this is a good opportunity to show you how do we query the database? How do we find out what's already in the database? Because we want to see if this Flickr photo is already in there. Okay, luckily we have that unique attribute, which is the Flickr's photo ID. That we can use to do that. So how do we make a query in the database? All right, we make a fetch request. Okay, that's what fetch requests are for querying the database. And we'll call this one request. And when we make a fetch request, we have to say what entity we're fetching. Here we're obviously fetching into the photo entities in the database. When we make a request, we also have to make sure that we set our predicate. Okay, the predicate is describing what is it you want. Which photos do you want? Okay, so I'm going to say predicate with format. And then you provide a format string here, and again, you're going to want to go look at the documentation for this predicate and see what you can do, and you can do a lot. But in this case, it's a pretty simple one. I just want to make sure that the unique, I'm going to look in the database and see if the unique attribute in the database photo matches the Flickr infos object for key, Flickr photo ID, okay, which is the unique ID for a Flickr photo. Okay, so obviously in my request, I need to be asking for the one I want. We also need to do the sort descriptors. And so I'm going to create a sort descriptor. It really doesn't matter in this case because we better only be getting one of these things back, 1 or 0. So it really doesn't matter, but we'll go ahead and do that. Sort descriptor. Let's go ahead and sort by title. Okay, we can sort by anything because it doesn't really matter, and ascending doesn't matter either. Okay. So let's set the sort descriptors. You'll remember that those are plural, okay? Sort descriptors, because you could sort by first name, last name, and then sort by first name. So I'm going to use the array with object method that you guys thought would be useless, but is not. Okay, so now I've made my request. How do I execute my request? Very easy. I'm just going to say matches equals context. Execute this fetch request for me, please. Okay? And I can also get error information back. So we'll go ahead and do that. Oops. Error. I like to set this to nil. In iOS 5, this would automatically be nil, but I like to explicitly set it to nil. Maybe it's just because I'm used to programming iOS 4 and before. I don't know. But anyway, so this matches is just an array of all of the photos that match this predicate. Okay, now this is a unique string, so hopefully there's only 1 or 0. Yeah?
Do you have to actually specify like an empty?
That's a very good question. I don't remember. The question is, can the sort descriptors, do I have to specify sort descriptors? Can it be nil? And I can't quite remember. I think it might have to be, because this is an array, right? So it has an order.
The array, you know what I'm saying? That array, yeah.
Yeah, see what I mean? So I don't know. I don't remember. Look it up. Okay, so we got this matches thing. So let's check for some things. If matches is nil, okay, then we had an error. Okay, so if ever you get matches of nil, that's an error. Also for us, semantically, if matches count is greater than 1, that's an error, okay, because this is supposed to be unique, okay, and so we just got more than one thing that matches unique. So here we would handle error. We're not going to do that here, but we would. Else, if the matches count equals 0, then we want this stuff. Okay, that means this photo is not in the database yet. You need to go create it. Else, matches must be 1, because we just checked if it was 0 and we checked if it was greater than 1, so the only thing left it can be is 1. Here we just want to say photo equals matches last object. Okay, so we're just returning the photo that we fetched, and we better make sure we return photo down here. Okay, everyone understand what I did there? So I'm just checking the results of my fetch to see how many results I got. And if I got 0, then I'm going to have to create this thing. But if not, I can just return it or handle an error if something bad happened. Okay? So let's go ahead and put the rest of these attributes on here. Subtitle. I'll use some copy and paste. Make this go a little faster. Copy, paste. Although actually this is value for key path. Right. Ugh. And this is description. And then what else we got? Photo.image URL. That is Flickr fetcher URL for photo, Flickr info, format, Flickr format large, let's say. And we need the string because you can't store URLs directly in the database, so we need a string. So we will make sure we get escape completed strings and all that, absolute string. What else do we need? Well, we need photo.whotook, okay? So how are we going to do that? All right, photo.whotook. Once again, we don't really want to be creating photographers and setting their attributes and stuff in photo. That wants to live in photographer. Okay, for object-oriented encapsulation-wise, we want that to be in photographer. So let's go put that in photographer. And we're going to do that by creating another category. This one for photographer. Category. This one I'm not going to call Flickr. I'm going to call this one create. Because there's nothing about the photographer thing yet that is using any Flickr information. Because the only attribute in the database for the photographer is his name, okay, and the photos he points to. So I'm just going to call this one create. I'm doing that also just to show you, you can call the category whatever you think is most reflective of what it does, it actually does. So here I'm going to cheat. I have some code predefined. There it is. I'm just a very fast typer. But this does exactly the same thing as the photo one does. Exactly the same. It's just that here it's setting the name instead of setting all the title and subtitle and all that stuff. But it's still uniquing it, and it's uniquing it by name. So we'll never have this two photographer objects in the database where that has the same name. We're going to assume if they have this same name that it's the same photographer. So let's go ahead and put this in our header file also. Okay, but you can see it looks exactly the same. I'm just creating a photographer with a name here. And then back over here, I can just say whotook equals, I'm going to have to import. Now, this is an interesting one right here. So what do I import here to be able to call that method? Okay, I don't just import photographer.h. I have to import photographer create.h so that I get the header file that includes the method I added to photographer. Everyone understand that? And I'll have to do that back in the other class too. So anyway, I've got photographer here, but when I call this method, I just send it to photographer. I don't send it to photographer create. I just send it to photographer because my create category in photographer has added that method to the class photographer. So now photographer has that method. So now I can say photographer with name. The name is Flickr info, object for key, Flickr photo owner. And we need the context, which is the same context was passed into us. So you can see this better. So that's whotook. Okay? So you can see I've set whotook. I didn't set the other side. But this photographer's photos attribute will now include me automatically. Okay? And you're going to see later we're going to look at that photo set, and it's going to be automatically set. All right, well, hopefully I haven't forgotten to do anything. Did I do all our relationships? Oh, title, subtitle. Oh, unique. Let's not forget unique. Very important one to set. Photo.unique equals Flickr info object for key Flickr photo ID. Yeah, if I didn't set that one, I'm not going to get very good uniquing behavior out of this code. Okay? Everybody got that? Okay? So that's all that is. Now let's go back to where we were at the beginning, the photographer's table view, and use that. Okay, got to import it. Import photo. Oops, not photo. Photo plus Flickr.h. And notice that if I'm importing this, I really don't need to also import that. Okay, because this imports the other. All right, so photo. Photo with Flickr info, the Flickr info. Managed object context is the document's managed object context. Okay? This does return the photo, so if I wanted to do something to the photo, I could do it. But here I'm just interested in creating the photo, just getting the photo created. All right? So that's all I need to do to load up that entire core data database. Okay? It's just iterate through the Flickr photos that come back from recent georeference photos and call this factory method that we made. And all it does is that insert new entity thing and then sets all the attributes. And the only thing else it's doing in there is uniquing it by trying to fetch it first. Okay, everybody cool where we are so far? Because now the next step is we got to do this fetch results controller setting. Okay? Because now we have a database that's populated, or it's being populated in the background actually. And as it's being populated, we want to make sure that that context, as more objects get added to it, our table view magically updates to it. All right? So to set our fetch results controller, we need a fetch request. This is going to be the fetch request that determines what's in the table. Okay? Very simple in this case. we're going to have, sorry, I'm going to make more space for you again, fetch request. Now, what's the entity name here? Anybody? What entity are we fetching in this table? Nobody? What's the name of this class? Photographer, yeah. This is a photographer table view, right? It shows photographers. So when we make a fetch request, it better be fetching photographers. Okay? Understand? It's going to be kind of interesting here how we're going to make the predicate for this. But bottom line is we are fetching photographers. Only photographers will be in this table. Every row in this table will have a photographer object associated with it. Because this is a photographer's table view. That's what we want. Cool? Understand that? Okay. All right, so what else do we need to do? We need the predicate. All right, so how are we going to decide what photographers we want here? Now, in this case, actually, we want all the photographers. So what kind of predicate do we use to say all the photographers? Then the answer is a very, very simple one. It's this one, nothing. Okay, if you don't specify a predicate, you get all of the objects. And that's what we want here, is all of the photographers. But we still need the sort descriptors thing. And we could do this all in one line if we wanted. Array with object, and a sort descriptor with key. Now, this key is sorting photographer, so this has got to be a photographer key. Okay, so we'll sort by name. Okay, we'll sort our photographers by name, and we'll say ascending yes. So that's going to be alphabetical by name, sorting this. And, oops, too many square brackets. There we go. No, that's not right either. Sort descriptor. Oh, I see. Too many over here. Okay, so there's our sort descriptor. So that pretty much defines what's going to be in this table, is the result of fetching all the photographers, and they'll be sorted alphabetically. So now we need to create the actual fetch results controller. And we do that by saying fetched results controller alloc init. Oops, alloc init. And here's the init for that thing. I'll put this on separate lines in a moment here. But it wants the fetch request, obviously. So, whoops, sorry, reg. The fetch request. It wants the manage object context, okay, which is our self.photo database managed object context. It wants the section key path, but we have no sections, okay, nil actually. We have no sections in this table. And it wants the cache name, and we're not going to cache either. All right, so put this so we can see this a little clearer. Okay, and that's all we need to do. Okay, now it is automatically going to fetch all the photographers in the database and keep all the photographers in the database in this table, no matter what happens in this context. Now be careful a little bit here. If things happen in other contexts, it's not going to automatically update. Okay, and that's why on your homework I'm saying let's just have one context to make life a lot easier for you in general. So what else do we need to do to make this work? The only other thing really we need to make this table work is we got to do self row at index path, right? Any table view, you got to load up the cells or nothing will appear there. And here's the really important thing to understand there is when you're doing self row at index path on a fetch request controller driven table, what you get to load up the cell is you need to get the manage object that's on each row. So in our case, we have photographers. So I'm going to say photographer equals self.fetched results controller object at index path, the index path that was passed to us here in self row at index path. Okay, so that gets the photographer that it's asking me right now provide a cell for. So now that I have the photographer, I can do things like cell.textLabel.text equals the photographer's name. And I told you the subtitle, let's have that be in a string with format, let's say something like %d photos. And %d, which is the number of photos that this guy has, is going to be photographer dot what? Photos count. Okay? Everyone cool with what I did there? I just asked the photographer for its NS set of photos, and then I sent the message count to it. It's an NS set, so it understands the message count. And so now I have the count of photos. So now the subtitle in my table is going to be the number of photos. Okay, so hopefully I have not missed anything. Anybody notice that I missed anything? Well, we're going to find out right here. Okay, so this is not going to build. Okay, and this is important why this doesn't build. You see it has 5 errors right here. What are these errors? Linker errors. Okay, now this is the same thing as when you built MapKit thing. Okay, you have to go get that framework and include it. And just as a reminder how we do that, we go up to, click on our project, go down to targets, go over to build phases, and if you link with binaries, we're only linking against UIKit Foundation and Core Graphics. We need to hit the plus and add Core Data. Okay, this is exactly what you had to do with MapKit. You have to do it with Core Data as well. All right? So now let's run. I have no errors. That's good. So this table is active. I can scroll around in it up and down, and it automatically filled up when stuff was fetched. Okay? So when I first came in there, I was able to scroll around. There was no data, but then as the data came in, you could see it zoop. If you watch carefully, it actually filled it up. Okay? So we never said anything. All we did was associate that fetch request with this table, and all of a sudden stuff is automatically loading. And notice also it's showing the number of photos. You see, this guy had 7 photos. Now we haven't done the photo table view, so it's not showing us any of them yet. But you can see how it's working. Now, one other thing that's kind of interesting is notice that this is in alphabetical order, but not it's case-sensitive alphabetical order. You see how it's getting to the end of the alphabet and then starting with A's? Okay, so how would we fix that? That would be fixed right here with your sort descriptor. Okay, so we have a sort descriptor right here. There's another sort descriptor creating thing which lets you specify a selector, and one of the selectors is localized case-insensitive compare. Okay, which is does a case-insensitive compare. Now watch 2 things when I run this time. Okay, one thing is we'll look at the sorting, but 2, notice how it comes up immediately. Okay, why does it come up immediately? Because we put all that data in the Core Data database. So it just fetched it. It didn't go and do a Flickr fetch because this document already existed. Okay, and you can see now that it's sorting it case-insensitively. Question?
When you got the number of photos for each photographer, was that fetched on demand or when you got the initial set of?
So the question is, when I do down here, are you saying what? What's your question?
So when you do the big fetch for all of the photographer information,
right,
does that automatically go recursively?
Okay, so the question is, when I fetched all the photographers, okay, I set that fetch request to be all photographers, and the table did it. Did all the photos come with it? Right? Did they all get fetched in as well, or at least all these sets? And the answer is no. It fetched as little as possible, except for performance optimization. It might have prefetched some things, but it might not even have fetched all the photographers, let alone all those photos. Okay, now when we scroll down, it might go back to Core Data and get some more photographers for us. Okay, it's very efficient, and you have a very large data set. It's not going to bring them all in. Okay, that's this whole faulting mechanism that I was telling you about. But you don't have to worry about any of that. It happens all behind the scenes. It's pretty awesome. All right, so, yeah, question?
So I thought that we downloaded photos and then added them to photographers.
Yeah.
Which means that for those photographers, it may say 1 photo, but they actually have a lot more on Flickr that we didn't fetch.
Right. So so the question is, when this says, 2 photos by Fables98, that's just 2 photos in our database. That's not 2 photos in all of Flickr. We didn't download all of Flickr. Okay, we're only querying on the database here. Any information you see in this table is coming out of the database, not out of Flickr. We just used Flickr to kind of load some initial data in there, so we'd have some data basically to search on. And you can see some people have lots of photos that were recently taken, some not so much. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is make the photos, the next one over. Okay, this table right here needs to fetch the photos by photographers. How are we going to do that? So I'm going to have the public API in photos by photographer, where I'm going to have a non-atomic strong. And this time, instead of having a document, I'm going to have this be a photographer. Okay? Oops. Put the photographer in here. Okay, so this is photos by photographer table view controller. So you give it photographer, it'll show you the photos by that photographer. So that's obvious that wants to be its model, its public API. So let's go ahead and synthesize that. Okay, so now how are we going to get this table to load up? Well, we need to do the exact same thing, which is set up that fetched results controller. So where am I going to do that? Well, in the setter for set photographer, again, I could say if not, well, we're running out of time, so I'm just going to do this. One thing I might do is title equals photographer.name. That's kind of cool to set my view controller's title. But another thing I want to definitely do is set up fetched results controller. Just like I set up the fetched results controller before, I'm going to do it here. So void setup. Let's go a little faster here. I'm going to copy and paste this other one. We'll modify it. Okay, so same thing here. This time we're fetching into the photo table, right? This is photos by photographer, so we're fetching into the photo table. We can't sort by name, obviously, because name is not a key on a photo. Title is. Okay, so we'll sort by the title. We can sort by other things, but we'll sort by the title. And the context that we're using is not self-photo database context. Where are we going to get the context? Anyone have an idea where we can get the context for this table? Okay, all objects know the context they were fetched in. Okay, so here we can just ask the photographer that we've been asked to show the photos of, what's your context? And I'm going to grab the photos out of the same context you came out of. Yeah.
It doesn't seem like there's any indication that the photographer should be a managed object if someone's using this class.
Yeah, there is, because if we go, so the question is, where's the indication that photographer is a managed object context? Right here. And the answer is, it's in the header file, because I look at photographer, and when I look at what the photographer class is, it's a managed object context. So it's object-oriented programming, right? So it's this inheritance. So, you know, you would.
We imported photographer instead of photographer plus.
Yeah, so the question is, why do we import photographer instead of photographer plus create? And the answer is, because we don't create any photographer, so we don't need to create. Okay? Right here, we just need photographer because we don't create them, we just use them. Okay, what else do we have? What's the other fetch? Oh, okay, and so we have an error here that fetch results controller is not set. That's because we need to make our this table view be a subclass of Core Data Table View Controller, which is the thing that adds that fetch results controller property. Okay, so now we go over here. And we're good. There's only one other thing we need to, well, two more things. Let's make this cell here, cell.text label equals something, right? What are we going to do? We're going to say photo equals self.fetch results controller, object at index path. So now we have the photo. Let's # import photo. Again, we don't need the flicker here because we're not creating any photos. And then text label text equals the photo's title. And cell.detail text label.text equals the photo's subtitle. Okay? And the only other thing we need to do is segue, right? Is prepare the segue. So that's back in our photographers table over here. We need to implement prepare for segue. So let's do that. Void prepare for segue sender. I'm going to do this a little slightly different than we've done some ones in the past because I want to show you a little different object-oriented style for how to do this. And it goes like this. First, let's get the index path that we're being asked to segue from. That is self.tableview index path for cell sender. Okay, we could also do selected path and some other things, but we're just going to do that. And then we can get the photographer that is chosen exactly the same way. In fact, I'm going to copy and paste it exactly the same way we got it up here, which is just say fetch results controller, give me the object in index path. Now here's what I'm going to do this slightly different. Normally here you would say if segue.identifier is equal to something, but I'm actually going to say if the segue destination view controller responds to selector set photographer, then I'm going to send it that message. Okay? Now, why would I do it this way? The reason is this table view only has photographers. It always is going to be selecting photographers. That's the only thing that really gets selected. So basically, I can now segue to any table view controller that wants a photographer as its model. Okay, so it's kind of a little more generic here. I can hook this up to any segue I want. Now, I had a design in mind when I did this, so I have to import something that defines that method, although I could make a protocol here to do that, but for time constraints, I'm going to just import this so that I get this thing defined. But this could be a protocol, or there's even a way you could just use perform selector in NSObject, and then you don't have to define it. But in any case, I'm just doing a more generic segue here. Okay? Everyone understand what I'm doing there? Instead of doing segue.identifier, I'm just seeing if the destination view controller responds to set photographer, and if it does, I do it. Now, does our thing respond to set photographer? Yeah, it does, because that's the setter for this public property. All right? Okay, let's see if I got this part all right. All right, so here we are. So we got all these. So hopefully if I click here, I will see, oh, so this is not right. Okay? I've got all the photos here. Why do I have all the photos? Not just the 5 here by BFS Man or Boz Brothers. I got them all. Why is that? That's because over here, we never set a predicate for photo. Okay, I copied and pasted it. That's the danger of copying and pasting. So let's set the predicate here. And what would be the predicate for this table? Okay. And what's happening here is we're being given a photographer, and we want all the photos by that photographer. So watch carefully. Who took .name equals the photographer's self.photographer's name. Okay? So we're going to find all photos where the photographer's name equals the name of the photographer we've been asked to show the photos of. Make sense? Just as simple as that. Don't be too put off by going through a relationship to query something. Even though this is a photos table and it looks like we're querying on photographer stuff, we are, but this is a photo attribute. So we are going through a photo attribute. The fact that we're going on to something else, not relevant. All right, so hopefully that'll work. Okay, here we go. So let's see somebody who has 4 photos. So that looks like 4. Here's 2 photos by Architecture Geek. Okay, 5 photos. So now it's working. Okay, now we're over time actually, so I'm not going to show you the next segue, but there's nothing really. You already know how to do that segue. It's just segueing to an image controller. Okay? So I will post this stuff. I'll also put some comments in, hopefully, so that you can reconstruct in your mind what I did. If you have any questions, you're going to have to ask me as I'm out the door because I got to go today, but that's it. Again, sorry for going over.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.